Introducing the terrifying, the deadly, the amazing dwellers in the cellar.
Hey, our name's the Cellar Dwellers.
I don't care, get out there.
No, they got my name wrong.
I don't care, get the hell out there, you moron.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Cellar Dwellers podcast. Today's a very special episode. I think it's like number 11 or something. But we got me right here, Christian down there, and our buddy Kyle right over here to talk about some movies that we all thoroughly enjoy. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire, J.K. Simmons, Alfred Molina, Willem Dafoe, James Franco. Thank you. Yeah, James Franco.
Kirsten Dunst.
They're three movies that, the three of us love and talk about and quote all the time. The third one, but we'll talk about that in a little while. We'll go through all the movies one by one. And we figured that Kyle would be the best one to have on the show out of all of our friends, because Kyle, out of all of our friends, absolutely adores these movies. And I mean, I don't want to jinx anything, but knows a lot about them. It's very knowledgeable.
I think Kyle's seen them more than you and I combined, for sure. I would just go on a limb and say that.
He's also, I'm not going to ask him to do it, but he's also very, very good at that Tobey Maguire, Bully Maguire dance that's behind you, Christian.
He's excellent at it. So
I've seen
Kyle,
it.
I thought and wanted you to have this background, because that dance that you did is honestly just as good as Tobey's. But I mean, of course, you had to have the Amazing Spider. That kind of fits.
Yeah, this is my first time on the podcast. I wanted to kind of be introduced in a nice way. But your background is actually my second choice. I had that loaded up, ready to go.
That's good. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Kyle's nickname is Bonesaw, who famously Macho Man Randy Savage cameo in the first one. That's probably one of the top things we always quote when we watch that. Something I'm sure we'll get into. I know we all probably have some notes, so I don't know. I guess we can sort of just go through film by film, because there's so much to love about every one of them.
Yeah. I think a good place to start is to have, I think I'll go first, then Christian, then Kyle, and then Kyle can kind of talk about what he likes about these movies so much. But just to go through like the rankings of these movies, our personal rankings. Like, I think I know the answer for everybody, but I mean, without explaining it at all, because I think our conversation will explain it. 3 is my least favorite. Not to say it's bad, but like it's my least favorite. And then, depending on the day, you could catch me going to either one or two. I go back and forth on all the time. I love them both. But Christian, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I would have to agree. I don't know. I'm the same way. Like, days when I see one, I'm like, oh, this is just such a great film. I mean, it has so much to love. It's kind of, in my opinion, the first sort of real like Marvel. I know there was other Marvel movies that had come up before, but it really was the film that put Marvel on the map. Something we've talked about before, and it just kind of set the stage for the second one, which, again, is just as good, if not better. I think the second one, in my opinion, depicts Peter Parker and Spider-Man, that duality that we've talked about so many times, the best way out of any, not only in the Raimi trilogy, but in any other Spider-Man film. So I would tend to agree with that list. I go back and forth on 1 and 2. But 3, I love 3. I think 3, similarly to Revenge of the Sith, as I always say, I think 3's aged like fine wine. Of course, we've shit on Venom and talked how unnecessary that was, but I still think that it gets a pass now, and I've grown to like it even more. At the time, and it came on 2007, seeing it in the theaters, I loved it. As a kid, I wasn't able to critically, look at films in different ways back then. You see a superhero movie, just instantly love it, but I still like 3 a lot, but obviously compared to the first 2, definitely not as good. All right, so Kyle, what do you think? How would you rank these 3 films?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a similar boat as you two. Obviously, as a kid, when I saw 3 in theaters, I loved it. I thought it was great. It was a lot of fun. Now I kind of see some of the problems with it, some of the issues mostly being Venom, but it's, you can't put that against Sam Raimi because he didn't really want Venom there. 2 ranks 2 for me. Great story. Everything about it is nice, compact. It leads well into the third one, picks up in a good spot from the first one. But for me personally, I mean, you can't beat the first one. It's my favorite of the three, maybe my favorite movie of all time. Just
Oh,
it's
wow.
yeah, it's just I love it so much. Everything about it, just from the start, Peter on the bus to the end at the funeral, everything. It's just a great story, and it's part of that. I think is the Spider-Man and the Green Goblin. Just Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin is iconic. He
Perfect.
comes back in No Way Home. It's just you can't beat Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, and he just is such a great foil for Spider-Man in that first one.
Yeah, he's in terms of villains, he's definitely my favorite villain out of the three films. You can kind of sympathize with him sort of and understand sort of where he's coming from, not to the degree of killing everyone, but the board literally fucks him over big time. Like he's the driver, of Oscorp, obviously.
Yeah, he started that company.
Do you know how much he sacrificed?
You know how much I sacrificed. It's just, but no, seriously, like you understand kind of where he's coming from, and then, Pete, Andrew, you're gonna be mad, but I kind of peeked through some of your notes, but you made a good point how, sort of the duality, not only with Peter Parker, Spider-Man, but the duality in the first one with the Green Goblin and Spider-Man. Like in the beginning, Green Goblin kind of sees them as one of the same, and once the public sees both of them, they're not going to accept either of them as either a superhero or even a villain. They'll turn on him, which I guess in turn he was kind of right. But yeah, man, Willem Dafoe, just unbelievable actor, and in No Way Home too. It's like he picked up right where he left off, in my opinion. Did not miss a beat at all in that movie. But yeah, that I think he really. I can't picture anyone else in that role. A lot of times you can see other actors, swooping in and out for different roles, but he perfectly depicts everything about the Green Goblin.
He's the Green Goblin through and through.
Yeah.
I think part of that dichotomy is also touched on in the first one during the Thanksgiving dinner, when obviously like the very subtle costume details of Peter wearing, I think, green and purple, and Norman wearing blue and red, just to show that, like, they're pretty much the same, and it was accidents that both situations gave them their powers.
Kyle, I have one question for Kyle.
Yeah.
Excuse me for interrupting, but Kyle, how did Peter get that scar on his arm?
Oh, I forget, honestly. It's something like it was one of those bicycle things in New York that hit
bike
him.
messenger.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just had one of those moments I had to interject. Continue, Andrew. Sorry.
That's okay. But yeah, I mean, I think that dichotomy between Spider-Man and the villain even goes into the second movie. Not like a little bit the third, but the third was kind of a mess. So it's hard to say for sure. But with Dr. Octopus too, I mean, obviously Spider-Man has matured a little bit as Spider-Man, having been in the city for a little while. So when he finds somebody like Dr. Octopus to be the villain, Dr. Octopus is obviously not quite smarter than Green Goblin, but I feel like a lot of the science comes into play a little bit more with Dr. Octopus and the masterminding of it, because he just wants to get the reactor going again. That the maturity of Spider-Man is kind of dueled with the maturity of Dr. Octopus compared to Green Goblin. And I'm not saying that Green Goblin is like a lame villain at all, because he's masterful, really, but it just kind of like shows how Peter's progressing as Spider-Man. And the third one is a little different with Sandman and Venom. He's kind of just like, Spider-Man's kind of just doing his thing as Spider-Man. Kyle, what do you think of the villains in these movies? Like, we know you love Green Goblin, but
yeah,
Dr. Octopus, Sandman, Venom, what do you think?
I mean, I think they're all good villains that Sam used in these movies. Obviously my favorite being Green Goblin,
Of course.
but and I think the weakest one, obviously, it has to be Venom, because everyone knows by this point that Sam is not a fan of Venom. He didn't want Venom in the movie, but Sony was like, put him in your movie. And, you can tell that it almost, three in its entirety, scene by scene, they each work pretty well. But when you put them all together, it's just too much. There's too much happening between New Goblin, Sandman, Venom. It's also a little interesting to me that Green Goblin and Doc Octopus, they have a personal relationship. Well, all the villains have a personal relationship, but those two aren't exactly in control when they're doing their, villain things, because Green Goblin's kind of got that split personality, and Doc Ock has the arms AI controlling him.
Good point.
And for Eddie, it's just all personal. He wants revenge against Peter Parker. And, even Sandman, he doesn't really care too much about Spider-Man. He needs him out of the way so he can do his job. And I think,
money.
I don't know, maybe it's tough to have them go against that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something I kind of understood but never really gave much thought. That's kind of like I said about Green Goblin, and even more so, I could say you could sympathize even more so with Doc Ock. Like he doesn't really care about winning the Nobel Peace Prize, but he wants to create that just sustainable energy for like the rest of the time on Earth human beings have. So he's doing what he thinks he's doing for the greater good, but of course with his accent he becomes completely out of control and he can't control himself. But obviously with Venom, it's a personal vendetta he has with Peter Parker, with Spider-Man, and they are, and Sandman even more so is in full control. I guess you could make the argument with Harry there that he's really in the beginning not so in control, but then again he kind of is, because he also has a personal vendetta against Peter Parker.
I'm not gonna lie to you, until this moment where you just mentioned Harry Osborn, I totally forgot New Goblin was in the third movie.
I remembered, but I kind of don't think of him as a villain when I think of the third one.
Well, I think, like you said, Kyle, because Venom got thrown in there, he was not in Sam Raimi's script, was not in his movie. He sort of takes a back seat, where I think the intent, if I had to guess, with Sam Raimi's original story for 3 was to have that obviously showdown between Spider-Man, Peter Parker, Harry Osborn, New Goblin, and also kind of Sandman maybe having a bigger role. Who knows how that would have played out, because I did enjoy for the most part that, that dilemma with Peter and Harry throughout the whole movie, right? Like that was kind of some of the best parts of 3, of course, besides this, but no, but like seriously, that was the most interesting, intriguing parts of the film is, Peter, of course, gets corrupted with the symbiote and, makes some poor decisions and stuff like that. But I still like to think that even without Venom, obviously you wouldn't have, Black Suit Spider-Man. Peter would have done some wrongdoing against Harry. Like he did kind of put him in the hospital when he, clotheslined him with the friggin' the web.
Well,
so
I mean, he did, not kind of, like he did.
Yeah, he did. So there was some guilt, and who knows how it could have played out. But I don't know. I thought that, the best part of that movie was the issue, and I guess the concluding resolvence between Peter and Harry at the end. That was some of the best parts of 3.
Yeah, when Harry's dying.
He finally forgives him. That was a good moment.
Yeah, I mean, you get the 3 of them together at the sunrise. It's a cute thing. It's cute. I had this thought. I don't know what you guys think of it. That maybe didn't mean too much in the 2000s when these movies came out, but nowadays you can look at it retroactively and see that, maybe this idea has some traction to it. But I feel like these are kind of unique in superhero movies, and especially in the genre today, because these movies are very character driven. They're all about Peter's relationship with himself as Spider-Man, with his relationship with other people, more so as much as I love, say, like the Avengers, right? It's a great movie, but that's really all about the situation of aliens invading or Thanos coming to Earth or Ultron, blowing up the world. It's a very situational movie, whereas you don't have as much time or space to delve into all the characters. But what I think Sam Raimi does with these three movies is that he focuses everything around Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And I mean, I know Kyle knows this line, but even at the very beginning of the first one, when he says, "Who am I? You're sure you want to know?" It like that one simple line at the beginning just solidifies the entire foundation. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously I agree with you. Spider-Man is one of the more relatable characters in the superhero genre, just the everyday guy. So it's kind of easy to see yourself in his place, with all the things that he tries to balance, work, school, relationships with others. So yeah, the fact that it is so character driven, I think helps make the movies what they are. And it's really, what the character is all about, just, seeing yourself up there. And so, yeah, I love the opening line, who am I? Because it really sets the tone. But then he also answers at the end when he's like, I'm Spider-Man because that's who I choose to be, even though it almost feels like he needs to be Spider-Man because of all, he needs to do for the city because of his responsibility.
So how do you think that connection to like the subjectivity, objectivity of Spider-Man, right? If you get flashbacks to freshman year of UMass, how do you think that affects the movie's stance as a superhero movie rather than just like a regular film?
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, these don't feel like superhero movies in a way, because what we think of as a superhero movie is very different, because it is a lot of action nowadays. And so this, these aren't the thing about, sometimes when we rate movies, we talk about movies, it's like, oh, this is a really good superhero movie. But the thing that's different about, at least the first two for sure, is these aren't just good superhero movies to me. These are good movies, because it's all about the character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's where the third one kind of went off the rails, because it still had some focus on Peter Parker, but Sony was just, so horny to throw Venom in their movie, add another, supervillain, anti-hero, whatever you want. But in that, he was definitely, more a villain. But in the third one, I kind of just cared more about the action and, flash and glamour of the villains. And even at the end, the final, showdown between Spider-Man, who you think at the time before Harry shows up, how the hell is he going to defeat Venom and Sandman? It's just a big final boss fight where I guess, Peter's kind of storyline of kind of figuring himself out and choosing which path to take. It, is it 50-50 or is it 80-20 or whatever have you? It kind of just, that all takes a back seat in the third one. So I think that definitely has something to say with how it's, not as good as a film as, 1 and 2 were. Because, like you said, Andrew, the first two, especially, they were just so character driven and figuring out who Peter Parker was, and just that great duality he has that, makes every superhero, I guess, unique, but even more so, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, that famous line, with great power comes great responsibility. That's really the whole second one too. Him, like, how do I balance this, right? At the end of the first one, he thinks he has all the answers. He's like, I'm Spider-Man. And then he realizes, well, I can't be fully Spider-Man and at the same time be Peter Parker. It's impossible. And no one can live like that.
Well, I mean, his friend has a real problem with it. In the dream, his friend is Spider-Man.
His friend is climbing the walls.
He's his friend
in his dream.
But I think you're right as well in the how like it's all about the duality of Peter Parker, and I think the third one tries to touch on it a little bit. I don't want to say it's remnants from Raimi's original script, because it does have to do with the symbiote Spider-Man, of how he becomes this totally different person and totally different Spider-Man.
Bully Maguire.
But yeah, Bully Maguire. But I also think that most of that is still thrown to the wayside when you get to, like you said, the big boss fight at the end, where everything is just I mean, not everything, because again, you do have those nice scenes with Harry and MJ. You know, it's mostly just flashiness at the end of the third movie, which I think really takes away from it when you consider how good the first two were.
Yeah, because you don't in the first two you don't remember the biggest parts you don't remember isn't the final showdown. You know, when he's in the courtyard, graveyard, whatever with Green Goblin, and then in the second one in the church at the river. That's not the most memorable parts of the movie. The memorable parts are everything in the middle or in the beginning, every other different scene, dialogue. I mean, my favorite scene of all time in the trilogy is the 2-minute fantastic montage that I think only Sam Raimi could do, with using raindrops keep falling on my head, when, like I was talking about, him being like, F Spider-Man, I'm full Peter Parker right now. Right. That it was just such a great scene. Like, he's just mowing on that hot dog and just ignoring the police and the cops. It's brilliantly great, like funny. There's so much about it. You could just talk about that scene in itself for like hours. But yeah, the first two for sure had way more character depth about Peter Parker than the third one.
So Kyle, what do you think of that raindrops scene?
Honestly, it's a great scene. I think it shows a good, a good side. The fact that, he chose to, he's like, I'm Spider-Man no more. I'm just Peter Parker. And then, we like to see that for Peter because, so much he never chooses to do anything for himself. And to finally see him, do well in class, see his friends show, enjoy a nice snack. It's a good time. And again, it's related. Like, I'm moving into a new career, so I'm kind of easing off my old stuff, helping people out, moving furniture and stuff. So someone messaged me like, oh, are you available this week? And I was like, I'm not. I'm sorry, I'm done. And I felt like I was eating that hot dog, and I was like, this is great, I love this. But it does feel a little weird. It's like, oh, but I could have been available if I made myself available. But sometimes it's nice to eat the hot dog and hear some music.
The big question out of that scene, right? The biggest question, I think, is, do you think Sam Raimi understood that hot dog chomp was going to be as iconic as it's become? Because I mean, that's crazy. That hot dog chomp, like, we say that and everybody knows what we're talking about.
I mean, I think this was a time before, memes and all that. So I don't think he intended to or thought that it would blow up as much as it did with just the countless memes you see online. But I mean, I think people will be surprised the amount of time and effort was probably put into making that scene. The attention to detail. I mean, just the fact when he trips and he's walking, if you notice in the background, like, everyone's like staring at him, like, not probably because they're just extras in the film, but also because it's like, this idiot just fell down. It just, I don't know, just the attention to detail in that scene, and there's just so much there. And I mean, that's such a good metaphor Kyle used, like, just chomping on the hot dog. He's like, this is my life now. This is what I chose. Like, I think, like I said, like that scene itself is very relatable, as Kyle, you just mentioned, like, getting into a new career. I mean, it's great because, and also, like you mentioned, you never really he always, up to that point, put Peter Parker by the wayside, and you need that balance in your life. Everyone needs that. You can't give something 100% effort and at the same time give something else 100% effort. It's never going to work. I don't know. The hot dog thing, I don't think he intended that to blow up as much as it did, but I'm sure he appreciates the amount of laugh it gets today.
I mean, Sam Raimi has a very, very unique sense of humor. I mean, if you've heard some of the things that, he said to people like Bruce Campbell on the set of his movies, like, I remember listening to one interview with Bruce Campbell about one of the Evil Dead movies they did. And he said something like, we were talking about the script, and I said to Sam, like, do you think I should say this? And he's like, no, I want you to look stupid, so I made you say this. And it was just like a dumb line that I think made it into the movie. But So I mean,
That's
I
another
wouldn't.
great segue, Andrew.
Yeah,
His Bruce Campbell cameo.
yeah,
in all
Bruce
three.
Campbell. I mean, I love Bruce Campbell. I've loved him ever since I saw him in Evil Dead. But yeah, let's have Kyle take this one off. What do you think, Bruce Campbell?
I mean, it's always fun to see him pop up in the movies because it's always a small role. But
Isn't that
it's a
him
good,
right
like, oh,
there
there he
in
is. You
your?
get to laugh.
Isn't that
Yeah.
him right there in your background?
Yeah,
gold
that's him.
jacket.
That's
Yeah.
the announcer.
Yeah.
He's like, the amazing Spider-Man. You got
He
my
gave him
camera
his-
on.
He gave him his name. Bruce Campbell gave Spider-Man his name in this universe. I
Yeah,
think
he's
that's
very
very
proud of that.
underappreciated.
Yeah, he
Um,
loves that. But I mean, I think the announcer might be. I mean, he's a good one. He might not be my favorite of the cameos because, just seeing the third one again recently, we all watched it. That scene in the restaurant is just so funny when he's like waving him in and he's going out, and it's just so goofy. But yeah, like Andrew said, Sam Raimi has a very unique sense of humor, and it's just that scene is just very comedic, even though it's kind of tough to watch because it's like you're cringing for what Peter's saying to MJ as she's like, "Who's this girl that you're with?" So it's just all together, it just meshes well.
And like the other thing I'm thinking of now is, as Andrew kind of posed the question about Sam Raimi and like what his intentions were, I think throughout every movie there's so much subtle comedy in there that like I don't know if
course.
certain dialogue that Peter has throughout, like Kyle and I just look at each other and start pissing ourselves, and like we all just start laughing at different scenes. Like I don't know if other people find that funny, if it's intended to be funny, if it's just up for debate, because of course comedy's subjective, but he does have such a subtle comedic style, and there's so many funny one-liners that are thrown in this movie, and it's just that with Green Goblin, for example, like all the great funny like dialogue that he has in the first one, like when he blows those people out, he's like, "How am I?" I mean, there's just countless examples of that. Like that it has to be clearly intended, because it relates back to a previous scene, and I don't know, but I love that style personally.
Sam Raimi is. I mean, he's not just some guy they picked off the street to make these movies. Like he knows what he's doing when it comes to making movies. I mean, obviously you have Evil Dead 1 and 2, Army of Darkness, Drag Me to Hell was also in the same vein as the Evil Dead movies, with like horror comedy kind of thing. But that was more of like tongue-in-cheek comedy, whereas Evil Dead was like body horror and physical comedy, acting it out more so. But even I watched Darkman recently, which is his other comic book movie with Liam Neeson playing the title character. And it's just really weird. Like somebody makes a dark comment about like how Darkman looks. And it's just like this awkward silence where you can't help but laugh or chuckle at least a little bit. And I think that Tobey Maguire in these movies was the perfect human embodiment of that awkwardness that Sam Raimi has and that he tries to put into his movies.
Again, I can't picture another person like similarly to Willem Dafoe. I can't picture another person portraying Peter Parker Spider-Man as well as Tobey Maguire did here. I think, like you said, he's the perfect embodiment of everything that Sam Raimi was looking for, and maybe there's a hint of like what he sort of sees in himself at one point in his life, like that quirky awkwardness. And
could be,
like in the first one when he's like he's thinking that she's waving at him and he turns around, it's like, oh damn, like there's so many like just great like awkward scenes. You just feel so bad for him, but at the same time you just laugh your ass off because he just looks so dumb. But also like he has such a good range, I think, as an actor, that I don't think he basically up until No Way Home, I mean, he wasn't really in a film for like years, so I don't know, Hollywood had some weird vendetta out there against him, but I think Tobey Maguire is just an excellent actor, and for me, he's like when someone says Spider-Man, like I the first thing I picture is him. Of course, Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland are great in their own rights, but he kind of got the ball rolling with this character, and I don't know. I think so many people visualize him as Spider-Man whenever you think of it, because this, like I said, I always say that these movies really, I think, jump started what we got with the MCU, and they clearly saw how popular, comic book films can do, especially a trilogy, within its own universe. And I don't think that even gets appreciated enough either. So yeah, Kyle, what are some of your thoughts on Tobey Maguire?
Well, obviously Andrew and Tom have done a great job in their universes, but Toby's Spider-Man is very unique in the sense that if you brought either of those two Spider-Men into these movies, it just wouldn't work quite as well. They don't fit, the tone, and it's just not, this might sound a bit mean. There's not as much to them, it seems. And I know they haven't had quite the same maybe chances. Like Andrew is a movie shy of Toby, and Tom's had to deal with other heroes in his movies.
Tom's had to deal with the biggest villain of them all, franchises.
Yeah, exactly. But Toby has, his trilogy that exists on its own. And I mean, now it's tied to something, but for many years it was its own thing. And he was just, a great Peter Parker and Spider-Man. I know people say, he wasn't as good as Spider-Man as others were, because he didn't make jokes, but he makes jokes. They just happen to be bad quips, which is what Spider-Man does. When he's like, "It's you who's out of your mind," like that's not good, but it's funny.
And I mean, that's the Sam Raimi coming in too. I mean, that's the awkwardness that Toby does.
I wouldn't put that on Toby. I mean, he's just working with the script that he has dealt to him. So I think that perfectly speaks to what we were talking about earlier with, Sam Raimi's just comedic style. I think, and I didn't really take that as a knock on the other two, Tom and Andrew that played Spider-Man, but I get what you're saying, Kyle. It just, with this Peter Parker Spider-Man role, and with this script and these stories and this type of comedy, it would not have worked as anywhere near as well as it did with Toby. He's just the perfect mold for that role. 100%.
Right. Yeah. He's got the action down. He's got the geeky Peter Parker. He is funny in his awkward jokes that he makes to himself. No one else finds him funny, but that's kind of what Spider-Man does. And, he does the serious parts very well. Like all the times when he's, crying, people are like, "Oh, he's got an ugly cry." Yeah, because it's real. He's devastated that his Uncle Ben has been shot on the sidewalk. Why? Like, you want him to look good while he's crying his eyes out? No.
Yeah. I mean, same thing.
Anyone that looks good during that.
Same thing applies to the scene. I think it's in the third one where he's telling Aunt May that he's like, "Yeah, you know what? I could have stopped the guy, but I didn't."
Yeah.
And I mean, the way that Tobey Maguire is able to portray emotions. I mean, I think, like Christian said earlier, he's a fantastic actor. And I mean, these movies are such the perfect background to show that. I mean, for a lot of reasons, I'm happy that he and Andrew were in No Way Home. But I mean, if only to see Tobey as Spider-Man again, and to know that somehow in that universe everything was working out for that guy. I mean, that was the feeling I had when I saw that movie for the first time. And they ask him about MJ. He's like, we're working on it. We're making it work. And that was like hearing from an old friend that you haven't talked to in years, and knowing that like they got into their dream school, they graduated, they're working on their career, and everything's going right for them. It's just like such a great warm feeling to have. I know there are rumors floating around that he might be in Doctor Strange 2, which like it just clicked for me today why he of all people would be in that movie, because Sam Raimi's directing it. I don't know why that never, something didn't click. Maybe he'll be in that one. That would be great. I'd love to see a Spider-Man 4 with him in it. Even if it's not like the scrapped Spider-Man 4 with the Vulture, but I think that and I want to know what you guys think of this too. Obviously we know that Sam Raimi was working on Spider-Man 4 with Tobey Maguire. The Vulture was going to be the villain, but it was going to be like an older like an older man as the Vulture, Adrian Toomes in like the classic green suit with the feathers and everything. And I think that if you go off of what they did in this first and the second movie, with the villains kind of mirroring Spider-Man and Peter Parker's maturity level, I think if you do like a old man Spider-Man versus an old man Vulture, or I mean any villain really, because it doesn't have to be Vulture, but I think that would be like a good kind of, not really like send off for Toby, but kind of like, yeah, you know what, like I'm good. Like his story it's satisfied.
Yeah. I listen, we've talked about it before, Andrew. I think in the No Way Home episode, like that we'd both be gun ho for any other, whether it's a Tobey Maguire, a Sam Raimi, Spider-Man 4, or if Andrew Garfield gets a third movie, us three would be the first in line to go see it. So there's no question there. But no, that would be kind of, I guess, sort of to right the wrong of how that movie didn't get made. And also just imagine it, if obviously at this time people realize, Sony realizes getting their hands involved in Spider-Man 3 was not a good idea at all, and the success that Spider-Man has had just long term and the money they know they can make from these movies. Can you imagine if they gave Sam Raimi just full reins to say, here, conclude this story here, here's Tobey Maguire, and like the sky would be the limit on what would be done, and it would just be such a so great to see, because 3 ended fine, but there was a lot of questions still, like how did everything work out with MJ first off, and he still really didn't figure it out in terms of who he's fully meant to be. There was still some questions there. And I love how he says when he sees Doc Ock in No Way Home, he's like, I'm still trying to do better. Like that would, so that's, he's still working on it. So it's not done. He's not really finished. He's still trying to figure out what his full, who he's fully meant to be.
I mean, obviously it was great to see him in No Way Home, and it is nice that we kind of got, a little update, like, MJ and I made it work. Yeah, he's trying to do better. He, especially after 3, he did a lot of things that he regretted and needed forgiveness for. But yeah, to kind of get more from that would be great in a Spider-Man 4. Personally, I don't know if I'd want it to be the Vulture. I know that's what Sam had planned for 4, but we saw Vulture recently in Morbius, but more so in Homecoming. And it was a good villain for a young Spider-Man, but I don't know much about the character. I don't know how, when I think of Vulture, I don't think he's that intimidating. Especially for an older, more mature, more experienced Spider-Man. It's just some old kook in a clock tower making bombs or something in a winged suit. Yeah. I think maybe a little bit more of a challenge would be necessary to really appreciate Toby in Spider-Man 4. And I don't know how that personal connection would come with Adrian Toomes that, he had with his 5 other villains, if we include the new Goblin. But I absolutely, yeah, if it is Vulture, I'd see Spider-Man 4. If there's no villains in Spider-Man 4, I'd still see Spider-Man 4. It doesn't matter.
Just Tobey Maguire. That's it. 100% screen time.
Yeah, just like small criminals just swimming around the city. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest problem I can think of for creating new Spider-Man movies outside of Marvel Cinematic Universe is the fact that it's going to be so hard to put a villain into this movie that makes the villain seem unique, because in addition to the villains we've already had, so we have Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, Sandman, Venom, New Goblin, Electro, Lizard, Green Goblin again, but like kind of sort of Green Goblin.
Worse.
Yeah, Dane DeHaan. Vulture, a little bit of Shocker, Mysterio, and obviously, the collection of them. Couple that with the fact that you now have a Venom solo series. You have a Morbius solo movie. Sony's making a Kraven the Hunter movie. Where do you pull from to get a villain that's unique, that's never been done before? I mean, I'm sure there are some we can think of, like Ghost Rider. I don't know. That's the first thing that popped in my head. I don't know. But I mean, I don't get.
That's because Nick Cage is always on your mind.
Nick Cage is always on my mind, and I just looked at the Ghost Rider Lego figure that's right over there.
I mean, I do like that idea you said, Andrew, of how Green Goblin and Doc Ock, it was a kind of a mirrored version of Peter Parker, sort of in terms of his length and longevity of being Spider-Man, and how far, tested has he been, and sort of can he overcome this obstacle, can he overcome that, and he's learns from both battles. But I like that idea that you said of he's old and very mature now, and then an older Vulture. But at the same time, I get what Kyle said, like I don't, from what he's seen alone, I don't know how much of a threat that would be. So if anyone can figure out a good movie, a good counterpart for him, it's Sam Raimi. So like Kyle said, whoever the hell's in it, as long as Tobey Maguire's in it, directed by Sam Raimi, I will go see it. And even if it's, which I doubt it would be, even if it's complete dog shit, I'll still say I love it, because I'm just so far deeply involved and in love with this universe. I could not hate anything that would come out of it again.
Of course. I totally agree. No matter what, I would go see it.
Yeah.
Even in Amazing Spider-Man 3, I'd go see.
One thing I kind of wanted to ask you guys is something we've all talked about. I know Andrew and I have talked about this a lot, sort of not really shifting gears, but kind of going back to what we were talking about before. A lot of people I've heard different, film reviewers and whatnot, different people I watch on YouTube, they all sort of think or have said at one point or another that Spider-Man 2 is one of, if not the greatest comic book film of all time. I just kind of wanted to get your guys' thoughts. I know, Kyle, you think one is good, but I like I said, I go back and forth, and I think they're equally great. But I can totally understand and see how people could say that, because I think something you and I have talked about, Andrew, before, is what also makes these movies so unique is they don't really rely on other characters and other storylines and other branches of that universe that is the MCU, right? Like it's just its own thing.
Yeah.
And of course, Spider-Man's such an iconic, probably one of the most iconic superheroes ever. It makes sense why so many people just are attracted and get sucked into these movies. But I think too, as we've discussed, just does such a great job showing that duality of Peter Parker and Spider-Man just throughout the whole movie, and him sort of realizing, like we said at the end of the first one, he's like, I gotta just be Spider-Man. All right, I gotta ditch Peter Parker. Like I need to be Spider-Man. And most of that is due to the fact that he feels the guilt over having Uncle Ben killed. So he's like, he's got to right that wrong and just be Spider-Man. Like, but then he obviously realizes, well, Peter Parker is also who I am too. So I need to make sure that part of my life is taken care of. And, for better or worse, I think towards the end, he kind of figures out, I can do both. Both can be manageable. And there's just so many great scenes, and Doc Ock is such a fantastic, counterpart to him in the movie. I would definitely agree that it's probably one of the best, comic book films made. And I'm sure Andrew would know that Raimi probably, dug out so many other comic book stories, Spider-Man stories, and put them in that movie. But yeah, I would probably say it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I'm gonna defer to Kyle tackle this one first.
Okay, yeah. So for me, I mean, they're both obviously fantastic. There's really no problem with either of the movies. So if someone could, most people do say, "Oh, Spider-Man 2 is the best of the three, if not the best superhero movie," and I'll give that to them. If you think that, by all means, it very well could be. But for me, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with the first one. I prefer the first one mostly because it's very thematically similar in who am I? We are who we choose to be. Am I going to be Spider-Man, be responsible? Am I going to be the good guy? Or am I going to look out for Peter Parker? And I just like how, Green Goblin poses that question to him a little bit more in the first one. And it is more of like a discussion, especially like the rooftop proposal when he's like, join me, think about what we could do together so that innocent people don't die. And then he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take you down because you're evil and you killed those people. I'm not going to follow that path. And Doc Ock is a great villain, and he shows a different path that he could take, but he doesn't quite offer his handout like Green Goblin did. So for me, it just comes down to the fun of the villain. But Two is a great story, and it very well could be the best superhero movie of all time.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think, Goblin definitely posed that question. I think without one, you obviously don't have two. So I think Goblin posed that question to him, and that even furthers his dilemma in terms of like, who am I meant to be? And I think as two comes along, he's clearly progressed, he's clearly matured, and he slowly realizes like, wait a minute, like if I'm fully Peter Parker, things aren't going well. If I'm fully Spider-Man, things aren't going well. I need like some sort of change. I need to do both and give both the equal amount of attention that they deserve. But yeah, that obviously it's a great point. I do think Green Goblin is a better villain, better counterpart than Doc Ock. But I think just overall, two has the most in terms of who Peter Parker is figuring himself out to be.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the same as Christian, as we already mentioned. I go back and forth between 1 and 2. I mean, you ask me one day, I'm gonna say, oh yeah, Spider-Man 1. It's my favorite, obviously. You ask me the next day, I'm gonna say, oh yeah, Spider-Man 2. Duh. Like, what else is there? What other answer is there? I think that Spider-Man and Green Goblin are like Batman and the Joker or Superman and Lex Luthor. Like they're two sides of the same coin. I mean, they are the definitive Marvel duo when it comes to hero and villain. So obviously, I mean, you get points for that. You get points for Green Goblin and Spider-Man, and especially, well, you don't always get points for that, as you see in Amazing Spider-Man 2. But the way they
done
do
right.
it, yeah, when it's done right. I mean, when you see the way that Raimi, Defoe, and Maguire handle it in Spider-Man 1, it's a relationship that's so carefully handled to still create this dichotomy between the characters of good and evil, and how, with one different decision, the whole world could be different. I mean, if that machine didn't turn Norman crazy, he could be a good guy. If Spider-Man decided to take his offer on the rooftop, he could be a bad guy. And I think that character relationship is probably the most valuable part of the first movie. The second one, like Christian said, again, it really solidifies, the Peter Parker problem of who do I want to be? I mean, I have these two roads ahead of me, and they're both equally as valuable as each other. And he really has to decide which one he takes, and that's a core fundamental piece of the character. And I mean, you could make an argument that that's a fundamental piece of every superhero, or mostly every superhero. But I mean, Spider-Man in and of itself, like I always say, there's something about Spider-Man. There's something that every single person can relate to at some point in their life that Spider-Man has gone through. Do I think that Spider-Man 2 is one of the best comic book movies of all time? Like 20 years ago when this movie came out, 100%, no question. Now, like, I got to think about it. Like, I don't want to say it's the best one, but I mean, I can probably comfortably say that it's in at least the top 5, maybe the top 3 ever. But I mean, not that we're saying like all other superhero movies are bad, because there's been some really good pieces of superhero film work that's come out, contrary to what Martin Scorsese has to say. Like, there's so many good superhero movies that come on. I mean, obviously my favorite is Batman vs Superman, which I know is a hot take. But even if you want to stick to Marvel, like what the MCU has accomplished over the last 12 years or so. Is it 12 years? 13, 14, 2008?
Yeah.
Yeah. Decade plus, let's say. What they've accomplished over the last decade plus is it will never be matched again. I mean, the scale of the MCU and the significance of the MCU. So something like Avengers Endgame or even Spider-Man No Way Home, I mean, just what those movies accomplished, not even regarding the quality of those films. I mean, it's unbelievable. But I will say that Spider-Man 2 and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, like Kyle said so eloquently earlier, they're just good movies. I mean, bottom line, they're just good movies. So it's hard to say too many bad things about 1 and 2. You can say a lot of bad things about 3, but it did give us Bully Maguire. So I have to give that to Sony. I don't give them much credit, and you know that, but Bully Maguire was a work of art.
And I think what you just said, without these 3 films and the success they had, who knows if we would have ever got what the MCU, has become. Sure, I'm sure they still had plans to do most of it, but even without this movie, but in my opinion, this really kind of kickstarted that whole era of genre of comic book films and how successful they can be. So a lot is owed to this trilogy.
Yeah, but if you told someone 10 years ago, 15 years ago that you're getting a Guardians of the Galaxy movie or an Ant-Man movie, it's like, what? Ant-Man? Why does Ant-Man need a movie, right?
Yep.
But I mean, I think you're right. These 3 movies kind of...
It garnered interest from the public.
Yeah, and I mean, it began to lay a foundation showing how cinematic superheroes can be.
I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, not to, obviously, if you take a little bit of a step back, there's X-Men that came out in, I think, 2000, and that was, I think, well received. But the X-Men aren't Spider-Man. Everyone knows Spider-Man.
Right.
And people love Spider-Man. It's just, you can't, he's one of the most recognizable heroes. So I think, yeah, I'd have to agree. It's, the X-Men, good movies, they did well, but they're not going to be as big as Spider-Man can be because everyone they love him,
I
got me.
I hope people watching understand all these references we've been throwing out, but yeah, that's a good point, Kyle. I mean, I think X-Men is purposefully separate from what the MCU has become, right? And it has sort of a segmented audience, and all those movies were like so up and down, right? I think every Spider-Man movie that was made, obviously some are much better than others, but for the most part, in terms of like audience reaction, people loved all of them. Of course, the Amazing Spider-Man, suffered from poor script, but people still really loved, Andrew Garfield at the time. I remember liking the movies a lot, and especially, at the end of the second one, it just so depressing what happened with Glenn and like the turmoil he has to face. Topic for another day, but when you think of it, it's like everyone just loves Spider-Man, and there's some negatives and critiques you can have, but for the most part, he's different. He is. And you made a good point earlier, Andrew. I think he's also different in the sense that he's definitely the most relatable in terms of that dichotomy and duality we keep talking about, and like, which path do I choose? What am I meant to be? Who am I meant to be? Where am I meant to go? He faces that dilemma, I think, more so than any other superhero that I can think of. And that's what makes him so unique, and that's what makes him stand out, to so many people. And, my father, for example, like, he doesn't care for really a lot of the MCU movies, but he took us to, both Spider-Man 1 and 2 up in New Hampshire, and like loves them. And when there was like a trailer or something for No Way Home, and I'm like, oh, you got to watch it because Toby's in that. He's like, oh, I love those movies. Those are really good. Like, so that's coming from him, who like doesn't really like Star Wars or the MCU. So I don't know, that kind of stood out to me. Like, wow, like I think just an average film lover that really isn't, involved in, on top of a lot of the superhero movies that us three are into and go and see, I think they can appreciate these movies. And I'm sure, most people have seen at least one, if not all of them. And, like I said, I just think across the board, Spider-Man films have been very well received. So that says something, in and of itself.
Yeah. And I mean, if we can talk about just for a short while, like the minor details of these movies, right? Because I mean, obviously we've been talking about like the big picture, right? Like Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi style, and that's great. Those are like very, very important things for a good movie, but tiny details, right? First one that I pick up on all the time, the suit, man, gorgeous. And I think part of the reason you can see in my background a little bit is, one, it's actually on the actor, which is great because like special effects only go so far sometimes. Two, these little like tactile webbings that he has on his arm just adds like that little bit of texture to the visuals that makes it look like cool, for lack of a better term. It's unique. I mean, comic books are bright and colorful at times, and you need to reflect that in certain movies. I mean, there's a time and a place for the dark and dreary and depressing, because comic books are also that. But I mean, the bright and the shiny and the flashy, I mean, that's all comic books. I love the suit. There are certain like small scenes that I want to just touch on really quickly as well, but I mean, the suit is probably my favorite minor detail. What do you guys think about these?
Yeah, I also like love the suit, and it kind of just sparked a memory I had like when we all saw No Way Home. I think us three had the same reaction when he pulled down his shirt and you see the suit. Like we all were just like, oh my god, like
Always comes prepared.
It does stand out in, compared, not knocking, Tom and Andrew's suits, but it just sticks out because, like you said, Andrew, like he's wearing it. And I know, they have suits that they wear that Tom and Andrew wore, on set and at different times in the films, but a lot of it was way more CGI based and relied way more on CGI, where this was just fully authentic.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I kind of already touched upon like my favorite scene in all of them was the raindrops keep falling on my head montage. I mean, that's one of my favorite 2 minutes really in any movie I've ever seen. Seriously, like I love it so much. It's funny. It's meaningful. It's just I've gone back and like watched that way too many times to count.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just so much to love in all three of these movies, and you can talk for days about them. But Kyle, I have to guess one of your favorite scenes is your background. I don't know. I don't know if that's correct, but
I mean, when I think of my favorite scenes from these movies, I don't know if I think of the wrestling match, but it's a fun scene, there's, a lot of serious themes in the movies, but this is like the origin story of Spider-Man. This is a fun little moment, how he got his prototype suit and his name. It's a fun scene, and it's a bit gimmicky and it's a bit goofy, like Sam's style. But yeah, I mean, Bonesaw, the human spider, it's a fun scene.
And I think what came out of that scene is something we quote all the time, when the ad said 3,000. I missed the part where that's my problem. And then he returns a favor to him just so brilliantly, and it's hilarious. It's just
and then it quickly
gold.
Turns into heartbreak though, which is what's so crazy and so good about these.
Yeah, and it, the unintentional, actions that his actions had on Uncle Ben, of course, it's so brilliant, and that scene's fantastic as well.
Yeah, I mean the wrestling scene, I mean, you could have chosen anybody to play Bonesaw McGraw, anybody, but you choose Macho Man Randy Savage. and you get like, it's incredible. Like, what are you doing up there? Like, staying away from you. It's just, it's
Yeah.
so funny. I mean, it's for lack of a better term, a lighthearted scene. And
Totally.
when he's just trying to figure out who he is, like, what's he going to do with these powers? I mean, he can do anything. He could take over New York, really. I mean, he's got the power to, because at this point, nobody can stop him, right? But like, he's like, yeah, I need money for a car. I think it was a car he's buying, right? And
Impress Mary Jane, yeah.
yeah. And he could do anything, and he becomes a wrestler because that's how he can make money. I mean, obviously he's like cheating in the match because he has superpowers, but that's not the point. And Randy Savage in the movie was great because I know there might be something surrounding that, but in the movie he's great. Bonesaw McGraw, it's super funny. I love like he's like, I'm back, and then he falls like, oh, my back. I showed that to my mother once, and she's like, why is that funny? Like, Mary, did you not just watch?
And the other
same thing that I saw?
detail, Kyle, I don't know if you noticed it, but I noticed it rewatching that scene recently and told Andrew, like in the beginning when he's like, I need to have focus on what I want, and he falls on a Ford Focus.
Yeah, I've seen people talk about that.
Again, like the attention to detail that Raimi has, especially I think it in 2 is just phenomenal. It really is. But yeah, there's so many, I think, lighthearted moments in all 3 movies that, just create the perfect balance of like seriousness, suspenseful, and great comedic relief. Because like Kyle, like you said, like that's who Spider-Man is at heart. He's supposed to be like funny and quirky and like stupid at times. That's who he is. So like if you had a serious Spider-Man Peter Parker, like it would not be well received, especially the people that really know and love the character, that like us 3 do.
Right.
One of my favorite quips was in the second movie when Dr. Octopus is breaking into the bank and Spider-Man's like, here's your change, and he throws a bag of coins at him. Stupid things like that make me just adore Spider-Man, no matter who's under the mask. I love Spider-Man. Well, I mean, Peter Parker. Miles Morales is cool, Gwen Stacy is cool, but like Peter Parker is Spider-Man to me.
Yeah.
He's one of those characters that I mean, superheroes and comic books in general, like obviously you need to have stories that, can sustain the character for decades and decades. And sometimes those stories lead to other characters taking on the mantle of that character. Like, for example, Dick Grayson taking over for Bruce Wayne at some point. Like, I understand Bruce Wayne is Batman, but like, I could see Dick Grayson being Batman. I could see Damian Wayne becoming Batman. And I know that you have other people like Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy, like I said, but I mean, they never just hold the same weight as Peter Parker, at least to me. I mean, I know there are people that will live and die by Miles Morales, and that's fine. I mean, great for them, but Peter Parker is Spider-Man for me through and through.
Yeah, because like we've been saying, there's so many things we've already, talked about what they were, but he's just different. Peter Parker, Spider-Man, he's just different. He stands out. He's insanely unique, and like more so really than any other, superhero with their alias. It's Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and I appreciate Miles Morales and the other adaptations of Spider-Man. But yeah, that's who I go to and think of, and I think a lot of people do as well.
A close second for me is Peter Porker, Spider-Ham. Kyle, any closing thoughts from either of you that we gotta throw in there before we end? You are the expert here.
Yeah, no, I don't have any closing thoughts because we're gonna talk about this after the podcast. We'll always talk about the Spider-Man movies. I could say goodbye to the audience, and that'll have to do, I suppose. But I mean, as long as I'll live, I'll be talking about these movies, I think.
That's a good point. No, you're right. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, it's like we can finish the conversation. We'll put a pin in it, but we'll pick it back up later.
It's not done. The conversation, the jokes, the memes we send each other, that'll never die. That'll keep going. This trilogy will live forever, and I'm sure we'll all continue to watch these movies time and time again.
And Kyle, we'll after this this recording is over, we'll sort out payment. I'm thinking $100.
The answer
Yeah,
is
what's your
3,000.
rate?
Yes, thank you for getting it. I was nervous there for a minute that you would
Too
be
funny.
like, what? Payment?
You're gonna set it up. I'm gonna knock it down.
Thank you. Thank you. Like Kyle said, like we'll talk about these movies anytime. In the description of the YouTube videos, I always post Cellar Dwellers Instagram, my letterbox, Christian's letterbox. I will also post Kyle's letterbox if you want to read his reviews on Spider-Man, because I know he wrote a lot about the Spider-Man movies.
Oh yeah,
I actually don't
Very-
think I have one up for Spider-Man.
the
There's
first one really.
Spider-Man 2 you wrote a lot about. Spider-Man 3.
Spider-Man
Spider-Man
2,
2,
I liked
probably
it a
wrote
lot.
about, and I don't know if I wrote anything for 3. I meant to, and then I never did.
Kyle, that'll have to change. I think you'll have to go back and watch them all, which I'm sure you'll have no problem.
Yeah,
with.
I'll do that tonight. That's fine. But I have one for one saved on my hard drive. I just never posted it.
Oh,
It was
really?
a bit long.
That's okay. My
I
reviews are
typed it
long
in like
sometimes.
Word, and it was like 3-page.
Wow. That's
That's
a lot.
fine.
That's a lot.
But yeah, I look forward to reading that. Your review of 2 was fantastic.
Thank you.
So yeah, we'll close it here for, like I said, episode 11. I think I forgot. But yeah, you know, you get Boldy McGuire, you get the Human Spider, and you get J. Jonah Jameson as Spider-Man. So if J. Jonah Jameson can become a fan of Spider-Man, anyone can become a fan of Spider-Man. Bottom line.
Totally. But Kyle, thanks for coming. We'll definitely have you on again.
Thanks
But
for
of
having me.
course, this was definitely one of my favorite episodes to do.
Yeah, it's fun to be here. Fun to listen. I've heard all the episodes, so I always enjoy hearing your thoughts. It's fun to be part of it.
He's our number one fan, Andrew.
Yeah, he is. He always comments on our YouTube videos. Comment against him. Tell him he's wrong. See what happens.
I'm never
Oh,
wrong.
spark some discussion. I'm sure Kyle. I hope you comment on yourself. Like that kid, Kyle. I don't agree with that point.
Oh, I'll say something. Yeah, I mean, I definitely made mistakes. Like,
Just have a conversation with yourself. All right.
yeah, I'll just create a couple accounts.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
As we always say, Kyle, make sure you tell your friends, neighbors, grandmother, mailman, everyone.
Dog walker. That's an
Dog
important
Reading.
walker too.
dog walker.
You gotta spread the good word.
Next door neighbor,
Absolutely.
mutant turtle that lives in your sewers.
Yep. Anyone.
Yeah.
Anyone with the pulse.
But that's it for this one. So thanks for listening, and catch us in the next one.